guys, we are back, and today joining me is Cat Vandament. And let me tell you, we became the fastest friends over coffee. I seriously pulled up beside her in the car and was like, are you Cat? And give us 2 seconds and we were off and running. But actually, it was our kiddos that met. Yep. So we are brand new to the area, and the kids, my son, her daughter, started the exact same class, and our son came home and he goes, "Now don't get excited, Mom. I have a friend, but she's a girl, but she's not a girlfriend." No truer words have been said, actually, because they have hung out and played and are the best of buddies, but there's no other interest, which just, anyway, we could talk about that forever. But today, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for taking a few minutes away from the kiddos and the husband and sharing with us today.
I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Okay. I'm gonna let you tell your story, and I'm gonna shut up for a minute, and then we'll dive in.
Well, which part? Oh my gosh, there's a lot. Yeah, we're just military family, 13 years. Here for a year, maybe 2. We don't know yet. And it's true. Our kids, all of a sudden, my Cam's talking about Christopher, this boy. And I'm like, okay, you have a friend. This is exciting. And probably the fastest that ever happened in a new place. So
they needed somebody like this in the middle of the pandemic move. I would say that military children are probably some of the most, for the most part, well-balanced, easy to get into the next step. And they just bonded because they're starting the same journey together.
Yes, I think so. Absolutely.
So y'all are here for a while. We don't know how long.
Right.
We are also unsure at this moment what's happening. And so today I would like to have you share your story. Today's title is actually, "What Child Is This?" And Kat and her husband went through adoption. So they have Cam.
Yep.
And then their adopted son.
Yep.
So let's start with, why was adoption a good option for you?
Sure. For us, I think you have to back up. You have to start with how did we get Camille? And she is ours biologically, but there is quite a journey through the infertility piece that comes with our life. And so after 2.5 years of trying to have her with an unending amount of what seemed like fertility treatment, we finally had her in 2011, and we went through the process again to try to have a second child in 2015. Yeah, it was 15. And just a lot of a balancing act, like with this military lifestyle. It was hard the first time for her, just trying to have her, because we went through deployments and trips and TDYs and all these things that started and stopped the fertility journey. And 9 rounds of treatment later, we finally, the very last round actually, before we considered moving on to IVF, and found out we were pregnant with her. And then of course he deployed 3 days later. That's the way it goes, right? And so when we started down the journey again the second time, we had of course moved. So now we're starting over with brand new doctors. We were in small town Oklahoma at the time. And so our treatment options were in Oklahoma City, or they were in Dallas. And so we have family in Dallas. That was the logical option for us, but it was a lot of interruption. I had to keep leaving, teaching my preschool job. Camille had to travel with me back and forth, because he would be gone in Dallas for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, and all these different things factored in. And eventually we just said enough is enough. And for us, the decision to pursue IVF, we didn't take it lightly. We had to really weigh out a lot of options. We had to decide, what is right for us when we're spending this dollar figure. Like, IVF is no joke as a military family. None of it is covered.
None of it's covered.
Nothing is covered. once you have a procedure scheduled, nothing is covered. So none of the hormone injections, none of the ultrasounds, doctor visits become 100% on the family. And so we had to weigh that because we couldn't get answers. We went in and we had the consult about in vitro with the doctor we were working with, and we came out with more questions than we went in with. And so for us, that was kind of the line in the sand. And we had always talked about adoption. We always knew that that was going to be part of our story. We just didn't know when or how or what it would look like. And so after that IVF appointment, we just went home and quit talking about it. For probably about 3 or 4 months, we just didn't discuss it at all. And we both spent that time in prayer, just trying to figure out what God wanted us to do, really. And after about 3 months, my husband walked in and he goes, "Okay, I'm ready to adopt." And I was like,
wow.
Okay. And at that point, we also knew we were getting ready to move again. And so you
can laugh at that
we
now.
laugh now.
But you don't laugh at that moment.
Right. So we made that decision. We knew we wanted to pursue adoption. We knew we were moving. So that was like March. And when we made that decision, we knew that we were moving that summer. So just 4 or 5 months later. And so in the meantime, I knew I was leaving my teaching job when we moved. So I jumped in on a new venture of my own with Noonday Collection, which is how I got my start with them. And they're rooted in adoption, which I also liked. And they do fundraising opportunities for families that are adopting. So for me, that was a way to make an income and fundraise to help pay for our adoption at the same time.
And as we must remember, Cam is ever present.
Yes.
So how old was she?
So when we made the decision to adopt, she was 4. I think she had turned 4.
So she was a little bit in the eyes of a child, a little bit more helpful at that point. We could potentially dress ourselves.
Yep.
We could potentially pour cereal maybe. And we could follow instructions.
Yes.
But that's about as far as you get with a 4-year-old.
Right.
So in the midst of a move, in the midst of major life decisions, we have a 4-year-old. We have a move. We have deployments. And we have a lot of stress.
Yep.
Where did you lean in at that moment? Because I know as military spouses, we find women that we can link arms with, that we have come up with the same scenarios. We're living the same stress at that moment. So where did you find comfort and support?
Right. That entire time when we were in Oklahoma, was the first time that I ever publicly shared our struggle with infertility. And it was during a Bible study group of about 15 women that were an incredible family. And so they were a huge source. While in the previous year, my husband had been gone for 6 months for training. So they became my village. And so when he got back and we made this decision, and we started going through all this again, and I was like, well, I'm going to be in and out. And a lot of them were kids that I had in my preschool class, like their kids were in my class too. And my kiddo was friends with that Camille was friends with. And so we almost kind of got outed, I guess, because we didn't have a way to not share it. We had to, which is okay. But then the fear that I had of the judgment of what would come of sharing that I had a struggle with fertility was just I was shocked by how loving and caring that they just picked my entire little family unit up and carried us through all of it with, because I don't know that it would have been the same had we kept it quiet again, because that's the part I didn't say earlier, is that when we went through our fertility the first time and trying to have Camille, we told no one. We didn't even share that with our family until I got outed on a trip, because I was having to take medications while we were out of town on a trip with my in-laws. And my mother, and what you have to know about infertility treatment is you have to, when you're doing injectable hormones, sometimes you bruise yourself when you do an injection. And my mother-in-law happened to see one of the bruises and was like, what happened? And that's how they found out. But otherwise, we were pretty much alone in that, except for a couple of very close friends that we had that.
So do you mind sharing, if somebody is thinking about fertility, what does that process simply, because I know there are lots of different directions that you can go with it, but is there something that you can say, doctor's appointment, this kind of happens, just kind of a run through?
Sure. Within the military, there's going to be several kind of hoops to have to jump through, I guess you want to say.
Hoops? No
so,
hoops.
And it's something that I am working through with a couple of different organizations now. But one of the things, the first things, you know, you're trying to have a baby, you're not being successful, you have to wait a year, is kind of, unless you know that you have some type of fertility diagnosis from a young age, the first thing they're gonna have you do is they're gonna have you try for a year. Once that happens, you can go back to your OB, and then you can start the referral process and the beginning steps of what that looks like, which in our case looked like try Clomid for 3 months, and we're gonna bump up your dose each time, and then from there there's some lab work before you can get into that referral to see a reproductive endocrinologist or a fertility specialist, and then from there it's, you know, you have your consult, they look at your record, they will do some more of their own lab work, and then they'll kind of make their recommendation, and you kind of go with it from there as far as how you want that to look. And
is there a time amount, like they say you need to do this for this long? I mean, can you not go past a certain year amount?
Honestly, I think it's so different per person. Woman. Like it's completely different, and it depends on, is it female fertility, is it male fertility, is it a combination of both? Like, where does the issue really lie? And so some women can walk in and they can get a diagnosis and know that they have endometriosis, and so they need to go through a surgical procedure to have that reduced, or they know that they have you know, whatever it might be, a tilted uterus, or it might be a thin uterine wall, or whatever might be causing whatever the issue is. For me, I didn't have that luxury. I was put into the unexplained infertility category, which basically means for me, when they would do blood draws for me, I looked completely perfect on paper, but I just couldn't conceive a child. And they still don't know why today. So I will probably never know why I couldn't do it without help. And so a lot of that, I think, weighed into our decision as well on pursuing IVF, especially the second time, because when you go in and you've seen, when you're in the middle of a fertility treatment cycle, everything is spelled out. You're given a chart, you know exactly what you're supposed to do each day for the first 7 to 10 days. And then after that, you go in and you have ultrasound, and then they tell you based on what they're seeing in your ultrasound, you know, okay, you're going to go take this medication for 2 more days or 3 more days or whatever it might be. So it's very calculated, very, very, very calculated.
So it's not just here's a thing of pills. Right. Good luck to you. Right. It's very mapped out.
And you have to learn how to mix you have to learn how to, you know, mix your injections if that's what you're doing, or know the timing. Like there's some of the pills you have to take at a certain time of the day. Like it's very calculated, very regimented, very, it's very involved. It's very involved.
So if you were giving a woman some advice before entering into this, would there just be a piece of comfort that you might just...
I would say you have to give yourself grace, and that you have to recognize that you are still perfectly imperfectly made. And I did not recognize that for a long time. I carried with me for a long time through this that it was my fault, that I had done something wrong, that I was broken. And I didn't truly let myself feel all of that. I just kind of shoved it under the rug and was like, no, I'm going to be a mom. This is what it takes. Fine, I'm going to do it. Rose-colored glasses are a cool thing.
Right.
Because the second time when we went through fertility treatment, I knew everything. I knew exactly what to expect. I knew exactly what I needed to see on an ultrasound scan. And so I knew the second time. The first time I didn't have that luxury. So
it sounds like to me, looking from the outside in, find a support system.
yeah, absolutely.
Continue working on the fact that maybe you journal. I like to write. And I find that by doing a brain dump every night of just the messy out of my brain, and then I can see it. It's on paper. And it sounds like by sharing with somebody else who's going through that same, well, it's never going to be the same, but a similar
exactly
situation in life journey, that could be helpful.
Absolutely.
It also sounds like you need to look at your financial situation.
You do. Because in order to make the best decision for your family, you have to remember that your journey is not going to look like anyone else's. Like, it just won't. It is going to be different no matter what. And so you have to make decisions that are best for your family. And that's how we got to the adoption process for us, is we looked at all of those different things. We looked at our support system. We looked at where we were going, what we'd been through, and then the financial piece of, do we feel okay investing potentially $40,000 into a process that might not work? And so when we stopped and we looked at that and we said, what is the end game? What is the goal? Like, what do we want to see for our family? And for us, we knew that we wanted more kids. And IVF for us didn't look promising for that. And so with that, we decided to pursue the adoption process. So
that is
just a whole nother.
Okay. You've tried to make your body cooperate.
Yep.
And you decide, okay, we've done it once, second time, let's try something else.
Right.
Which is what led you to coming to the decision that it was a time to adopt.
Yep.
What is that first step? What does that look like?
Okay. So for military families, this is super hard. Based on what we learned. And so this is where a big piece of my advocacy has been pushing lately. And a lot of what I've written about in the past. And I was fortunate enough that my best friend from college had worked in adoption. She's a social worker. She has a master's in social work, and she had been working with a group in Kansas City. So I reached out to her and luckily had her in my corner, because although we were in different states and adoption is different
everywhere,
she could at least kind of give me an outline of what to kind of expect and where to start. And so I tell families that are interested in the adoption process, you have to start by looking at what can you commit financially? And then make sure that you have a village.
Always.
And the last piece is take the time to look into where you're living now as a military family and where you could potentially be living. Because the process is not short. I don't know anyone that has completed an adoption process in under a year. And really, if I'm thinking about that, I don't know anyone that's completed it in under 2 years. We completed ours in 21 months, from start to finish. But on the front side of that, I had that resource. I had my girlfriend that was able to kind of guide us through. And she said, make sure you know what type of adoption you want. Do you want an international adoption? Do you want a private domestic adoption? Do you want to pursue foster to adopt? So we had to decide, where do we want to fall there? And then we chose for our family private adoption. So then we had to look at, do we want a local agency that's going to be smaller potentially and right where we are, or do we want to go with a nationwide agency that's going to be larger and they both have pros and cons. So you just have to kind of dig into that and figure out what's right for your family. For us, we knew at the time where we were moving. And so we were able to locate a few local agencies. And as soon as we got there July 4th of 2016. And we were having our first intake interview in the middle of August of 2016 is when we had our first intake appointment with that agency there.
So how often do you meet? Okay, you said 21 months was the process. Is a lot of that time with interviews, or is a lot of that with waiting?
A lot of it is waiting. You're going to play the hurry up and wait game.
Oh, military.
Yes. So we're kind of used to that, right? And I think, we obviously didn't use a nationwide agency, but nationwide agencies and small local agencies, same kind of thing. There's still a lot of wait time. Mm-hmm. You're submitting paperwork and then you're waiting, and then you're submitting more paperwork, and then you're waiting to go into the match pool where you can actually have families view your profile and potentially select you. Then you're, depending on how far along that, I call them first moms. A lot of people call them biological moms. I call them first moms. I just like that better because she will always be his mom and I will always be his mom, but she is his mom first. So that's why my logic in that. I heard that from Rachel Hollis, and I really like that. I really like that term. So
it doesn't sound like it's as harsh.
Yeah.
It sounds loving.
Yes. Yeah. And so we just kind of, once we got matched with her, we matched in November of 2017, and then he was born in March of 2018. So we had several months where we were just waiting again. And that's kind of the way it goes. Now, our processes could have been potentially shorter. When we first got in with our agency, we had then, where we were living in Washington State, we started in August. By the time all of our stuff was in was October. We had a really bad winter. It snowed really, really early there, and it dumped a lot. And I'm going to tell you, where we were, a lot of the birth mothers, the first moms that our agency worked with were homeless, and they needed extended stay housing and things like that. But they were not trying to get to the bus station when there was 6 feet of snow outside, and to go and try to get to the agency to meet them, to let them know that they needed help and that they wanted to place children for adoption. So weather was a factor for us in why we waited. So there was a lull in birth moms coming into when all of our paperwork got submitted. And so we kind of had to push off and wait until the potential adoptive parents in front of us had made matches and things like that. Our advantage, I think, with our smaller local agency was that because it was smaller, they could really work us through the process and they could manage us very well. But they were very open as far as like, hey, like, we have to put a pause on you right now because we only have X number of people in the waiting pool. They could control things a little bit better. And that meant pausing for a little bit
And probably with the military, it's very, there's always somebody way up here that you don't know who it is, like you feel like are pulling strings on your life. So I would think that in your family situation, having somebody local that you felt like you could seriously pick up the phone and call and say, okay, just walk me through it a little bit. That was a lot more comforting than dealing with a larger, potentially maybe get you through faster.
Right.
But
I also felt like too, with a smaller agency, and again, like for the families that are listening, like, you have to choose what's best for you. Mm-hmm. For us, the smaller agency was better. I loved that we had more one-on-one contact with them. And I felt like they got to know the birth mothers that they were helping, but they also got to know the families that were adopting on a different level that I don't know, because I didn't experience it, we would have experienced with a nationwide agency, just because it's a sheer volume It's a numbers thing. And I can possibly be completely wrong in saying that, but in our experience, that is what we felt. And it was probably the thing that really drew us to them in general, was that just the very family feel that we got from meeting with them in their office, the conversations. They were invested in us just as much as we were invested in them. And I also loved the support that they were giving to first moms. They were, I felt like they went above and beyond, making sure that these women had a safe, warm place to stay, to gas cards, to food cards, to bus passes, to
help facilitate the whole
process. Yes, to get them to and from their office, to get them to appointments, to, I mean, I can't tell how many times I would get a call from one of our coordinators, and she would be driving back from the outskirts of town at 10 or 11 o'clock at night after having dropped off or picked up or met with or one of the first moms. And it was incredible to see just the extra mile that they went to make sure that these women were taken care of.
Oh, that's, I always wonder about that part. All I have to compare that to are the movies, which are not accurate at all. Right. So it's nice to hear that both sides seem to be loved, appreciated, and helped. Yeah. Let's fast forward through his birth.
Okay.
What does it now look like? There has to be an emotional pool that was a little bit different than Cam. I know in your heart there's no difference. You love them the exact same.
Right.
But the process was different.
Yes, the process is very different. And that's one of the things that can be scary with adoption.
Okay, Kat, if there were some emotions that went behind after the birth, like what might those look like? Did you experience anything that was just something you might want to share with us?
Sure. I think at the beginning, so we had an interesting situation. So our little guy ended up in the NICU for 11 days. I did get to be in the delivery room, which was really neat. Doesn't happen very often. Again, every situation is different, and she asked me to be there, so I got to be there, which is a privilege for sure. And we shared some very intense emotions right after that. Just both of us being in the room, and him, and it was there were a lot of tears. They're all happy tears, but then it was also, I think there were some tears of fear and not sure, exactly what this is going to look like after. But, and like I said, he ended up in the NICU for 11 days. I think at that point, it was so crazy how you just instantaneously, like, mom mode flips in, and it was just, it was like, all right, we're doing this and we're in it, and he's ours. And we had temporary custody, like, immediately. And at that point, it was almost you're just looking at this teeny tiny little guy who's just shy of 6 pounds and 3 weeks early, and he's having trouble breathing. And so, it was
an emotional
for sure.
Overload.
Yes, it was an overload.
Are you signing paperwork right there in the room immediately after?
So it depends on the state, on what the state says. For us, they had already signed their parental rights before he was born. So in the state of Washington, where we were, that can be filed 48 hours after a baby is born. But because of some other circumstances, we were essentially granted immediate temporary custody. So we were able to make the medical decisions kind of from the very beginning on his behalf. So,
and at that point, then does he switch to your insurance?
No, he actually stayed. The way that it works in the state of Washington, he stayed on the state's insurance through her until he was discharged from the hospital. So,
and there again, knowing one more thing to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of, you know, whose responsibility, because you're
Right.
navigating this new
Right.
thing. So that's something.
Right.
So he
definitely make sure that you, one more thing, there's a lot behind the scenes. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of things you do have to understand. But don't be scared to ask those questions. That's the big thing, is if you're not sure, like, ask the questions
and stay in a support group, because if you haven't had a child,
right.
you might not know to ask. I mean, I remember
Right.
bringing Emma Catherine home and looking at Christopher going, and I mean, she's our biological child, but looking at this car seat going,
what do we do?
What do we do now? I don't know.
And
we get her home, and the dogs are kind of, you know, they're like, oh, what is this? And I'm like, do we take her out? I mean, these are all just, you're kind of in panic, not panic, but it's
survival. It's survival.
Exhausted.
Yes.
And so I can imagine that just because you didn't physically give birth, you're still emotionally, mentally, and physically drained at this point.
And it's a totally different type of exhaustion, because I didn't go through X number of hours of labor this time. But it's just a totally different exhaustion. And it's because you don't know a lot. Like, sometimes you get to know a lot, sometimes you don't know a lot. And we didn't know exactly how long this NICU stay was going to be. We didn't know. There's just a lot we didn't know. And so to have to and I mean, we'd had a child before, but we had never had a child that had been in the NICU. So we didn't know what was going on. And we were only there X number of hours a day, because it's what they said. And there's a lot. Yeah.
The NICU experience, Christopher Jr. was a NICU baby, and we were there for 22 days. So that is draining, exhaust. Just,
you're hearing all these bells going off, and you're like, is that, you know, and we were isolated for the first few days till some test results came back for him before. And so it was kind of nice with this giant room by ourselves, but we could hear bells and chimes and dings from other little babies that were there with us. And then just not knowing what was going on with his bells until you learn how to read the monitors, and you're like, okay, no, we're actually okay right now. But I mean, and then watching Ryland after he would feed, his stats would bottom out. And so we were having to learn why was that happening and what was going on. And
it is a true adventure in patience.
And trust.
So maybe if we could give the listeners nothing else, it's you have to trust that you've made solid, sound decisions. You have to trust yourself, and you have to have patience.
Yes. And a lot of grace.
A lot of grace,
for sure.
Because you're in it together.
You are. And you have this other person too. Like, we have an open adoption. She could reach out to me at any point and want a letter or a picture, or, you know, I go the extra mile. I think I go the extra mile. I don't know if I do. But I put together a book that I send to our agency after each of his birthdays. That's that year. So if she goes to the agency, she can pick it up. I don't know if she's picked any of them up. I can't tell you.
So it's not like y'all call and talk to each other.
We haven't talked in a while. Which is, it's interesting. And I think that's kind of earlier what I was getting at a little bit, was this relationship is between, is parent to parent. And so when you understand, and you can kind of view adoption and an open adoption specifically in that light, is the relationship is between first mom and adoptive parents. And so when we were able to build the foundation of our relationship prior to his birth on that. And so now it kind of, you know, I'm not sure we have a communication agreement in place, but at the same time, a lot of that ball is in her court. So if she reaches out, I mean, I'll send her a text back, like.
But the agency really isn't in the middleman so much anymore.
Not so much anymore. if I needed to try to find her again, I would go through them. If she needed to try to find me, she would go through them, and they would work that for the most part. But yeah, it's been, I guess, a little bit over a year since the last time that I heard from her. So, and that's a whole nother, realm of experience and feelings and emotions. And so especially in a pandemic, like I wonder, like I'm incredibly thankful for this woman, because she helped complete my family. This is not one of those, it's not an ill will feeling. Right. It's not I'm better than you. It's not that. And I think that sometimes gets lost in adoption, and people think, oh, well, you did something so great for him. No, she did something so great for all of us. Like, it is incredibly, I think that's where my emotion in the delivery room came from, is that she is making an incredible act of selflessness and bravery in choosing to let someone else parent that child. And that's incredibly important for me to make sure people understand, is it's not that I'm doing something for him, or that me and my husband and Camille are doing something for him. It's that she did something huge for all of us.
Well, let me just say, you are a pretty fantastic mama. And he a fantastic daddy as well. And Camille is a fantastic sister. We had the enjoyment of going to Cam's birthday party. Yeah. And let me tell you, he is a spitfire. He is full on boy, all the fun. He's definitely a boy. He is so loved. Y'all have done such a great job raising him. Thank you. And it will be fun to continue to see his little journeys and isms as he goes on.
I'm ready for it. I'm like, he's a little linebacker, and we're just waiting for him to.
Yeah. It brings me great pleasure just remember seeing him running in the backyard. He is full on such a joy to watch and to even know more about his story. He's really cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting us talk about it.
And now you said you have some things that are coming up. So if people wanted to read or listen to other stories, where might they go?
Sure. So I have an article that was published in Military Family Magazine called 3 Truths to Know Before Adopting. You can find that on it was in print. It's now on their website, so you can find it there. I also wrote an article for them on how adoption gave us hope. That's online with Military Family Magazine as well. I was on the Turquoise Table podcast with Kristen Schell. So if you can find that, episode 17, season 2, episode 17, I think, with her, talking about how when we decided to be more public, we also utilized her Turquoise Table method and kind of created community around that. So I'm on her podcast talking about that. I have some work with Resolve coming up. I'll be creating a little video to go on there, a training video for their website. And then a couple other military spouses. Another one of our military spouses has been working with Resolve as well, and she has created an avenue for us to have a blog with their infertility website. So I'll be writing for them a little bit.
And what we didn't dive into, and I totally meant to, was Noonday.
Oh, yes.
Well, but for the simple fact that, isn't that how you were able to fundraise?
Yes.
And we did not dive into that. Is there somewhere that we could look at how fundraising is that? Yes. Would that be in one of the articles that you've published?
It's not specifically, but you can reach out. They can reach out to me, and I can kind of give some ideas on that.
So I'm gonna in the notes below, I'm going to give all these resources, how you can get a hold of Cat personally if that's a route you want to go. And we just really hope that if this is something that's weighing on your heart, that you reach out.
Absolutely.
Find a support group, do the reading, and wish you the best on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And make good friends. You never know who you're going to meet in the coffee shop. So guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Kat. And we'll be talking to you soon.